Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. So today we will be talking about Peach Blossom Spring by Melissa Fu. Lucky for me that one of the new releases for 2022 was Melissa Fu's Peach Blossom Spring. Before I rave about how amazing this book is, let's just talk about what is exactly this book's about. Peach Blossom Spring is a family epic which kind of reminds me a little bit of The Rice Mother, and it is a account of the story of 3 generations of the Dao family. We will be following Mei Lin, Renshu, and Lily Dao. The story spans from wartime China in 1938 to 2005 and finally blossoms into modern day America. So we will see about that. Some of the themes that the book explores: interracial marriage, cultural stereotype, discrimination, and also racism masking as jokes. But it mainly tells the story of determination of a single mother trying to keep her only child in the midst of all that bedlam and how people are just like in it for themselves. The character Mei Lin especially really reminds me of Lakshmi from The Rice Mother. She's the matriarch of the family, or what's left of her family, and she's the one that is like really fighting for the life of her son as well as her other family members until they chose to, well, abandon her. We'll get to that. From Renshu's perspective, we get to see how war affects a person from childhood into adulthood, and then with Lily, it's about finding your identity in a place that essentially refuses you, even though you're essentially born there. Interestingly, the story is actually loosely based on Melissa Fu's father's own experience, and it even in the final parts of the story, you get to see Melissa Fu's basically sort of trying to blend in the fiction and the autobiographical. It sets a really genuine feeling to this book. Similarly to Lily, she also doesn't have such a great relationship with her father. There's a sense of disconnection. When she is born in this environment where everything is like very peaceful, where the worst thing that she has to worry about is being late for school or getting bad grades. He grows up in a time where if you go to school, you might actually die. This is her way of connecting with her father. Melissa Fu's writing style is very beautifully rendered. It's very raw. The pacing it's just very consistent because you are moving through these different periods of history. You are experiencing this pain, the struggles. It is clear that Melissa Fu has done the right research, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like she's showing off. She puts the details in the appropriate amount. I wouldn't say it's comparable to The Rice Mother. I mean, The Rice Mother has a way more beautiful writing, but it is still close. Through these characters, we somewhat go through China in chronological stage, so we get to see the perspective of that, where Mei Lin is the old China, the China at its glory, and then we have Renshu, the China that is scarred and it's also trying to heal itself. And then there is Lily, which represents the ABC.
All good. I speak ABC.
Yeah, she also represents all the American-born Chinese that are trying to find their identity. I think she represents this new generation of China. The China that is trying to reconcile with the bitter past and embrace the modern future. Despite not actually directly experiencing the war, she sort of gets waves of it through her father. Lily ends up becoming the bridge of a reconciliation between Renshu and his turbulent past. The most flawed character in the story is definitely Renshu. I find myself really annoyed by him because he represents the state of transitioning to this painful, scarred state into one that is born anew. The moment when he gets the opportunity to study abroad, essentially leaving his mother for the first time in his life, he never looks back. One of the similar things that Renshu and Lily shares is the conflict of preserving heritage. Renshu, because of all the negative things that happened to his family, he wants to forsake everything. He wants to abandon his heritage. He forsake his homeland. He wants to get an American passport. He just refused to talk about China at all, or like indulge in his culture. How the war traumatized him affects how he's not able to enjoy the things that he loved in childhood anymore. Renshu is a character that represents the inescapable nature of war. So in order to talk about this, I'm going to talk about Renshu's plots a little bit, Renshu's character, so spoilers ahead. So once Renshu gets the opportunity to study abroad in America, he enlists the help of his uncle Longwei. His uncle is the only surviving family member he has left aside from his mother. Renshu's father is depicted as someone that is very genuine, very hardworking. It's just an all in all a good person, a good man. But then we see that Longwei is like the polar opposite. To put it mildly, he is the ends justify the means kind of people. Initially, I thought he was going to be one of those evil uncle that is like going to Mufasa his way into the family.
Long live the king.
Since we're seeing Longwei's character mostly from Mei Ling's perspective, and Mei Ling doesn't like him very much, but Longwei ended up not being a bad person at all. He is more like he's a mysterious person. We mostly never get to see how he actually managed to rise up the ranks in the army, but still, I'd say we don't have to. It adds to the intrigue, how he's able to achieve a lot of things in life. So he went to the US, he studies, he frequently sent letters to his mother. He's working as an engineer for the US government, and he's very successful in his job. He marries an American woman whom, thankfully though, Melissa Fu did not resort to the stereotype that Chinese people don't like white people getting married into their family.
My mom wants me to date a Chinese girl. What?
Mei Ling is actually quite pleased with Rachel and definitely happy for his son. However, if you actually read about Renshu's character, even though he loves Rachel, you can't help but think that he sees Rachel as a step to abandon his Chinese heritage. I'm not saying that Rachel is not lovable. Rachel is definitely a nice woman, an amazing woman. However, when you get to see his conflict and how he want to escape his identity, including everything that he has done in university, he avoids interaction with some people because he doesn't want to be associated with communists, and he knows that there's a lot of student association. They're actually a political movement. He's doing that to keep his scholarship, but as this time goes, you realize that he has grown this disdain, this bitterness over his own heritage because of what he experienced. There's also a part where he experienced PTSD, and he's also using American music where he wants to escape from his reality for a while. He's trying so hard to fit into American society that he even tolerates racism unto himself. He was getting discriminated at work, like some of the directors, they say they prefer to hear the explanation from his white colleague, even though the project was actually his, and it's as if like they assume he cannot speak English when he's like studied there for years, and he's just trying so hard to assimilate to the point where he loses his sense of self. When he met Rachel's parents, they were being racist towards him. Even after they got married, they're still being racist towards him and his child, and he tolerates them simply because he didn't want to be called a communist, being just all in all a good American citizen at the cost of his own self-respect. He has been scarred so much that he thinks, well, better experience racism than actually getting shot in the head, when ironically things like this happens, and in a way you cannot blame him. He's just extremely flawed, and I'd say I pity him. But there's a point where I find it really hard to pity him. From the moment he flew to America until he has a kid, until his kid has grown up and had a job, never once that he flew back to Taiwan. Yeah, at some point Renshu moved to Taiwan to escape the war. And Taiwan was like the last place that he lived. Never once did he actually flew back to Taiwan to like, hey, let me take my wife and my child to visit my mother. It is only after once Lily was like 5 or something that he bought a ticket for his mother to fly to the US. And his mother like as like, I don't know, 60 something, I think 70 even. It took you that long to finally have your mother visit your new home, to finally see your mother again. That's your mother. Literally the woman who shielded him from literal bombs. I don't know, maybe it's because I don't understand how everything works back then. It was a bit infuriating to see him taking that long to finally let his mother visit his wife and kid, who went through pain and hardship just to raise him, and he couldn't even bother to send a flight ticket a bit more. He's trying to rationalize it by saying, oh yeah, she's old and we have traveled so much when we were a kid because of the war, and having my mother traveling back and forth, it's too hard. I mean, like, dude, you're not asking your mother to walk from China to America. You're flying your mother over. There's airplane. I just feel like it is so heartless of him. I had to convince myself that this is a man that has endured war. This is a man that is raised in war, that he has PTSD and paranoia and stuff. Otherwise, I'd probably throw hands already. Despite that, I really find the relationship between mother and son very touching. They're like best friends almost. The story rationalized it by saying that Mei Lin probably doesn't want to travel anymore and that she's content where she is. At that time, Taiwan's condition wasn't as bad, and it was actually progressing quite smoothly. But still, like, in a way, Renshu is right. Mei Lin is too old to travel like back and too many times. But is it really so hard to send your mother a flight ticket once a year? Or once every 2 years? Is it really that risky? Is it really that difficult to do that for your mother? He only returns to Taiwan when Renshu finds out that his mother is sick and dying. And unfortunately for him, the moment when he reached her home, it's too late. She already passed on. And I was like, you know what? That's on you. You should have visited more often. You should have spent time with her more often. Can you imagine? Like, years. It took him until his daughter has graduated from uni. I think let's talk about Lily for a second. Lily, we don't really see much of Lily's perspective, but I think it's definitely not too scarce or too much, because this is eventually more towards Mei Lin and Renshu's story. The interesting thing about Lily is that, one, she is named after one of Renshu's cousin who died in a war, Liling. And then also, I thought that it is interesting that they chose the name Lily and that it is kind of like a amalgamation of English name and Chinese names. Of course, because it depicts her mixed heritage. Through Lily, Renshu imagines this ideal version of him, that grew up without the hardships of war. However, that does not mean that Lily, despite being American born, it's not that she is spared from all of the other pains that Asian Americans experience. From Lily's perspective, it's about accepting your identity. She's neither completely American nor completely Chinese. She realized that from childhood that she looks different from her American friends, and she's constantly been making fun of for her looks. She experienced racism in her life, but she doesn't even realize it. Like, among her mother's family, they call her, the G word. These are the reasons why she chose to seek refuge in finding her identity as a Chinese person. She wants to learn the Chinese language. She wants to learn arts. She loves her grandmother, even though Mei Lin does not speak English at all, and Lily does not speak a word of Chinese. They both loved each other, and Lily wants to further connect with her grandmother by learning Chinese. But then her father forbids her from learning Chinese because, again, Renshu's fear of being related to the communists. It even caused him to alienate his daughter. Remember, he already tries to reject his heritage. and he's also imposing that belief onto his daughter. But the thing about Lily's character that I like is that she is just as tenacious as her grandmother. Despite after being forbidden, she went to Chinese classes in secret, her identity is not just about being Chinese, it's more than that. It's about trying to reconcile with the mix of that heritage. As I was reading Lily's story, this reminds me of a chapter in Beyond Asia, Deconstructing Diaspora. This chapter was written by Ien Ang on not speaking Chinese, living between Asia and the West. And similarly, like Lily, Ien Ang also has a complicated heritage. She had to apologize for writing this story, for writing this chapter in English. Yeah, she says that throughout my life, I have been implicitly or explicitly categorized willy-nilly as an overseas Chinese. Watch out, I look Chinese. Why then? I don't speak Chinese. I've had to explain this embarrassment countless times, so I might just as well do it here too, even though I might run the risk in being autobiographical of coming over as self-indulgent or narcissistic. We get to see countless of time through Lily's experience that people just simply assume that she can speak Chinese, even though despite the fact that she never learned it. She never learned it properly, at least, and that she all of a sudden she feels like she's overcome with this guilt when she shouldn't even be apologizing for it. It's not her fault, and it shouldn't even be a sin not to be able to speak Chinese. I also find that it's interesting that Melissa Fu is doing the exact same thing that Ien Ang is doing as well, because she is using her father's experience to write the story as a way of, well, as Ien Ang describes as, autobiography is usually thought of as seizing the authority of authenticity. But in order not to be authoritative, I've got to speak autobiographically, because I find it really interesting how Melissa Fu is borrowing her father's experience as a way of, in here described by Ien Ang, autobiography is not conceived as a private of self-writing, but as the cultural act of a self-reading. And that, in a way, Melissa Fu is also trying to reconcile with her own family experience. Ien Ang in her essay describes how when she was in Indonesia, her family has to assimilate with the Indonesian culture. Renshu is trying so hard to assimilate for both political and personal reasons. Ien Ang also experiences Peranakan Chinese, but still it is very much similar to Renshu's experience. In here, she said, under these new circumstances, most Peranakans, including my parents, chose to become Indonesian citizens, although they remained ethnic Chinese. But it was a Chineseness which, for political reasons, was not allowed to be cultivated. Indonesian nationalism has always tended to define the Indonesian nation as comprising only the indigenous peoples of the archipelago, excluding the Chinese and other non-natives such as the Arabs, who were considered an alien minority. The pressure on the Chinese minority to assimilate, to erase as many traces of Chineseness as possible, has been very strong in Indonesia. For example, in the late 1960s, my uncle who had chosen to stay and live in Indonesia Indonesianized his surnames to Anka. You see what I mean? How similar their experiences are. Renshu and Lily are the product of diaspora. Their desperate reconciliation with their American and Chinese identity is definitely prevalent in this essay. When Renshu was studying overseas, we get to see how his surroundings, these other students were actively involved in the society. Some of them gets, politically caught. I don't remember what happened to that guy, but certainly nothing good. Despite being away from home, it really does affect him. In the book also it talks about the Tiananmen Square massacre, how Chinese people all over the world felt that shame, that pain over the atrocities that's going on in their own country back home, even though it's not their fault. But the student movements that, as depicted by Renshu, is birthed from this obsession that Ien Ang called the obsession with China. There's a lot of things to unpack in this essay, so if I find a link to the essay, I will leave it to the links down below. I think it is highly advised that after you finish reading the book, you go and read the essay to understand Lily's and Renshu's POV much deeper. Aside from those three characters, there's also other side characters that you can love and sympathize with. Surprisingly, the story is very diverse. It shows the different facets of war and how different people experience it and how people understand it. At the end of the day, the story is about finding a place you call home. It's parallels with the story that Mei Ling tells Renshu when he was a child, and that despite all the pain, despite all the suffering, they finally find their peach blossom spring. Before I end this video, I would like to quote my favorite line from the book, which is essentially the final lines from the book. It is an endless, fruitless quest, an eternity of disappointment. But in Mei Ling's telling, once the old fisherman arrives, he stays. He learns to leave behind what he has left behind. Mei Ling never wanted the story to be a tragedy. She just wanted to find an ending. The story ends when there is nothing more to strive after. There is no more wanting. There is only the fullness of blossom, the caress of a breeze. A sky joys with blue. This moment, this now, this peach blossom spring. And so, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.